Tonight, we're excited and honored to welcome author Oscar Hokeah in conversation with Rubén Degollado to discuss Oscar's debut novel, Calling for a Blanket Dance. Calling for a Blanket Dance is a moving and deeply engaging novel about a young Native American man finding strength in his familial identity. Told in a series of voices, we delve into the life of Ever Geimausaddle through multi-generational perspectives of his family as they face a myriad of obstacles and struggles, compounded by a legacy of centuries worth of injustice, all of which intensify his bottled up rage. Meanwhile, all of Ever's relatives have ideas about who he is and who he should be. Ever must take the strength given to him by his relatives to save not only himself, but also the next generation of family. How will this young man visualize a place for himself when the world hasn't given him a place to start with? Described by Elle magazine as quaking with age-old righteous anger, but nevertheless luminescent with hope, Calling for a Blanket Dance is a story of how Ever Geimausaddle found his way to home. Oscar Hokeah is a citizen of Cherokee Nation and Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma from his mother's side and a Latinx heritage through his father. His short stories have been published in South Dakota Review, American Short Fiction, Yellow Medicine Review, Surreal South, and Red Ink magazine. Oscar has spent nearly 20 years empowering Native American communities, currently living in his hometown of Tahlequah, Oklahoma. He works with Indian child welfare, where he gives back to the community that nurtured and embedded the indigenous values he passes along to his children. Oscar will be joined in conversation by Rubén Degollado. Rubén is the author of the YA novel Throw, which won the Texas Institute of Letters 2020 Best Young Adult Book Award and was a Christianity Today 2020 Book of Merit, among other accolades. His work has appeared in Beloit Fiction Journal, Gulf Coast, Hayden's Ferry Review, Image, and the recent anthologies Living Beyond Borders and The Pantla Families. His debut literary novel, The Family Izquierdo, which will be published in September, has received advanced praise, including starred Kirkus and Publisher Weekly reviews, being an Indie Next pick and included on the Millions Most Anticipated list for the second half of 2022. This event will also include a Q&A. I encourage you all to use the Q&A button. It's located at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to ask a question at any time throughout this event. If someone has already typed a question that you'd like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question. Perhaps most importantly, please consider supporting Oscar, Rubén, and Powell's by purchasing a copy of Calling for a Blanket Dance or pre-ordering Rubén's novel. Keep an eye out in the chat where I'll be sharing links to purchase these titles. Now let's give a warm virtual welcome to Oscar and Rubén. Thank you all.
Thank you for that, Bailey. I appreciate that. So I am so stoked. I'm so excited to be here sitting with the debut author, Oscar. His book, Calling for a Blanket Dance, is an amazing one. And I would just love to hear a selection. If you would, Oscar, honor us with a selection reading from the book.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Rubén. I just want to thank everybody for hanging out with us for a little while today. And I think we're going to start off with, I'm just going to read a little bit from the book. And I picked the chapter that's titled Quittin' Quitone. It has a really distinct kind of Kiowa voice to it. And so I'm going to read a little bit from that. I'm going to try to hit it right around 5 minutes. Just to set this particular chapter up, at this point in Ever Geimausaddle's life, he's just turned 18. And according to the, like within the tribe, at age 18, we would get a per cap. And so Ever Geimausaddle and Quittin' Quitone are cousins, and they had just got their per cap from the Kiowa tribe. Okay, so I'm gonna read that. So here we go. Quittin' Quitone, 1993. Yeah, we were just little guys, around a year old when Kiowa started getting that Hokeah back in 76. No, maybe in 77. It was a coalition of Kiowas, Comanches, and Apaches that leased a tract of land to Fort Sill military base for 100 years. Good thing, too, because us Kiowas divided our share of the money between all tribal members, 1,500 apiece. Those of us under the age of 18 had our money held in trust, growing interest until our day. We were the last in our families to hear our mothers say, "Your per cap check is on the table." My birthday landed 2 months before yours. On your day, you burst into a laughing fit, and I told you, "Ever, calm yourself down, guy." On my day, I simply said, your boy Quentin just got paid. And I maintained all the way into the bedroom, but we both tore into those envelopes faster than the last meat pie on a plate, ripped out those stiff government checks too. Remember the Statue of Liberty imprint in the upper left corner? Remember the line of numbers in the center right? Mine was $9,826.17. The hot off the press scent from that crisp paper hit us like the cool wall of air when we walked into the Bank of Oklahoma. Might know, the lady behind the counter did the same to you as she did to me. She glanced from the check to our face and back to the check again, tapping those red plastic fingernails on the counter. Her eyes barely squinted when she asked us how we managed to get our hands on that kind of money. You told her the tribe wanted us to help neglected bank tellers buy bleach for untreated roots. I had a permanent grin that no one could spoil, so I asked her if she dated Kiowas, and she said no. So I asked her if she dated Comanches, and she said no. So I asked her if she dated Cherokees, and she said no. Guess I was out of luck because I was all out of tribes. We waved at the bank teller as we pushed open the doors. That Malbane pretended to not notice. Still, even she couldn't ignore the 6,000 in the checking account or the 4,000 in our pockets. Wasn't it our oldest cousin Leanne who put her entire per cap in savings? Or maybe it was her sister Bessie. They saved the money for books and tuition at the University of Oklahoma. We had been dreaming about spending that a hung gift for 3 years since our boy Blacktail's older brother Big Bo got his per cap. He cruised into the south side of Lawton, our section of the city, the View, in a Cadillac Seville. That Cadillac was new used, uptown, clean enough to pass for brand new. Stink guy too, as he bumped down 11th Street and turned into the convenience store on three-wheel motion. Right then, that's when we knew we were not like Leanne and Bessie. On my day, my dad warned me, Quentin, fast money goes fast. And he drove us to OKC where I could find a good car cheap. It took us an hour and a half to drive up I-44, and I flashed open the bank envelope a dozen times, showing you and Dad both how the hundreds lined up as smooth as beads down a loom. On your day, I drove you to OKC myself. We were going to turn money into a line of colognes, hundreds, 50s, and 20s, bottled and packaged. Your Monte Carlo sat metal roll front at Honest Harry's dealership. You grabbed my arm so tight, I lost circulation. Said, Quentin, pull over 6 times. That dealer was bullheaded about the $3,000 price written on the windshield. What about $2,500 cash? He took the fresh bills, bulldogged, and signed over the title to your money. My Cadillac Eldorado dripped clean from a fresh car wash, gleamed gold with a tan paint job in the bright sunlight. It faced the main office at Classy Cars. The dealer wanted to take it home until I flashed open that bank envelope. He took $4,000 easy. Didn't even have to haggle for my L-Dog. Once back in Lawton, you still had cash in your pocket after buying your car. But on my day, I had to stop by the Bank of Oklahoma again. That same teller said I had to wait 3 days for a check to clear. Why did she give us $4,000 the day before? I asked to see the manager. Oh, it was a government check, that Malbane told me. She flipped her long hair to the other side of her face and pulled $2,000 from the drawer. At Soundwave, it cost me some serious cash for those 12-inch speakers, that 400-watt amp, a noise reducer, and an equalizer. My bass was clean and low, but I only had enough money left over for gas at McDonald's. You liked your music hard and dirty, so you dropped the last of that $1,500 for some 18s inside a plexiglass box. Low on funds, we weaved through the back roads of Lawton and returned to the Bank of Oklahoma. Was it on your per cap or mine when we ran to the building 1 minute before closing? That teller was already locking the doors. She gave us a smirk, spun on her heels, and disappeared into the bank. We cruised away, blasting the latest tape by the Zotai singers, and shook the building with waves of intertribal beats. We hit the back roads again, crept into the View, and parked on Blacktail's front lawn. That intertribal wave carried with the same rumble of those artillery shells from the practice rounds at Fort Sill, the ones that shook the entire city of Lawton. Proud guys, we danced the way Kiowas danced and reminisced about per caps gone by. So I'll go ahead and stop there.
You know, I read that I read that and you just brought it to life. Like that was amazing. I could have stayed listening to that some more. And that each of those chapters, those voices are just so unique and so powerful. And that was one of my favorite ones, is that story about the per cap. That I love.
Oh
that
yeah,
one.
thank
It's a
you.
good one.
Yeah,
Really
that was
sentimental.
yeah, that was super fun to write. I mean, I wrote that. That's one of the earliest chapters, or that is the earliest chapter I wrote. I wrote that back in 2008. So that's like 14 years ago, and I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts. I had, it's probably in my second, second year. It took me 3 years to graduate, so my second year, and I was just starting to discover my voice, or trying to figure out what my voice was. And even after I wrote that, like, really distinctive Kiowa voice, I was still kind of, trying to figure out where I was going to go with it. I really didn't know what I had. Like, everybody was telling me, oh, like, this is really good. It got picked up by American Short Fiction. It was initially titled Our Day, and it went into American Short Fiction, I think, in 2010, the 2010 issue. And so, but it took me till after probably a good 3-4 years later before I really realized, like, oh, okay, I write intertribal. I'm a regionalist writer, and it's kind of all started to sink in.
Yeah. Well done. Well done. So calling for a blanket dance, you're receiving all kinds of advanced praise, named as several lists, BuzzFeed being one, the Millions, and other outlets, and along with great reviews and starred review, I believe, in Publishers Weekly. And you kind of hinted at it a little bit, but I wanted to just know a little bit more. Can you talk to us a little bit about that journey to publication for this book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could. I mean, it was long. Like I said, it started back in 2018. It started with that. I mean, when I first wrote that particular chapter, it was a standalone short story, and I was just thinking maybe I could write, some stories revolving around the same character, and so I wrote another story. Well, at that time, I knew that I needed to make a distinctive Kiowa voice and a distinctive Cherokee voice. And so that was my distinctive Kiowa voice. And then the next story that I wrote was titled Time Like Masks, and it's Hayes Shade in the novel. So it's chapter 3. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I started to develop my ear for, hearing like a distinctive Cherokee voice. And so it was those two stories where I had Kiowa and a Cherokee voice based on the same character. And so I had this idea that I was going to create a series of stories around the same character and make it like a kind of a traditional novel in stories. I had just read Olive Kitteridge. I think she had just won the Pulitzer right around that time, right around 2008, maybe 2007, somewhere around there. But so I was like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could write a structure like that. So I wanted to try that out. I wrote this, this collection that I call Reflections on the Water at the time. And basically it was like a comparison between a mother and a son. And so it just kind of showed some of the similarities between the two. I pitched that for a while, didn't really get any takers. So that was probably around, I finished that maybe 2013. And then 2013, didn't get any takers. And so just set it aside. Like I put it in a drawer and I was like, man, it's not working. And just went through some of that self-doubt that a lot of writers go through. Like, maybe I don't have my voice yet, and still trying to struggle with, what is my voice? What kind of writer am I? And set that down. I didn't go back to it for a couple of years. So 2 years later, I started writing a different novel. And then I wrote the first draft of that. And then I got an email from one of my old professors at OU. And he just asked me, like a pretty simple question. He was like, what are you working on? And so it immediately made me think of that collection of short stories that I had. And so I pulled them back out. And I just decided at that point, like, it didn't work. So I'm giving myself permission just to tear this book up. And so I started pulling stories out. I started adding new ones in. And then all of a sudden it was like, it was a different kind of narrative art to it. I mean, it had more of a definitive narrative arc to it, where I was looking at the process of decolonization, as Indigenous people. We talk about how culture can be the solution for some of the troubles that we have in the community. I'm trying to overcome stuff like addiction and domestic violence. I mean, there's, just things that kind of plague the working class in general. You see a lot of it when, we're at the bottom of the economic ladder. We have these certain obstacles that we have to face. So just looking at it like through the process of decolonization at that point. And so I started to revolve the novel around this one character. And then I got the Asian in 2018, and then it really started to come together, because then I think I had a book that was about 50,000 words. And then I signed on with the agent, and then she said, well, I need you to add about 30,000 words. And I was like, what? Like in my head, I was like, oh my goodness, 30,000 words.
Daunting, right? When you think about
That's like crazy. But I didn't, I was like, yep, I can do it. I said, okay, yeah, sure. It's not a problem. But when you first, it took me so long just to get the agent, to get to that point, that it just gave me like a ton of energy. And so all of a sudden, like it really kind of to a certain degree felt like, okay, 30,000 words, I can do that. I finally have this opportunity. I'm going to get it done. And so I started adding in pieces. And so that's where Vincent Geimausaddle is born at that point. And then let me see, Alani No Water. She was born at that point as well. And let me Op-E Geimausaddle. She was born at that time too. And so once those pieces came in, it really brought the character, gave him a new life. Like it really gave him a new depth as well. So starting back 2018 and just kind of those ups and downs, like hitting, doing well and then hitting a down point and then doing well again. That's been, quite the journey for sure.
Thank you for telling me that. And as I'm reading the book, and I don't want to throw an idea in your mind too much, but as I was reading it, I was like, every single narrator could have their own novel, because their voices were just that strong as I was reading. And they're all circling back to Ever, and they wrap around him in their own way. But definitely I was like, each of these people could be telling their own story for sure. I'm intrigued. I was intrigued by before I read the novel. I'm not as familiar with Kiowa customs or Cherokee customs, but what I was very interested. What number one was the cover, right? But the title for me, that it was such an intriguing title. It drew. I don't know why. I don't know what it was about the title, but it drew me in. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. So the title's Calling for a Blanket Dance. It's our blanket dances are it's a kind of a ritual that we practice in Powell culture, and largely in like traditional kind of Powell culture. And so like the powwows that I referenced in the novel are these really small powwows. They're like they're traditional, and we call them powwows. They're not like the ones you might see that are really big, where you're going to have like 100 or more dancers on the dance ground. You certainly can at a traditional powwow have that many dancers out, but it's largely family. Family members are at that particular powwow. Almost everybody, if not everybody, and it's a large group. But so our blanket dance is it's a ritual where if someone is in need, what we'll do is we'll put a blanket out and we'll do a blanket dance to raise some money for them. So like if somebody can't make it to the doctor's appointments because they don't have gas money, then we will do a blanket dance and we'll say, hey, this individual, she needs to get to her treatments. And so, but she needs some help. So come on out to the grounds, come into the arena, let's honor her. Let's help her out, give what you can. So then the drum starts up, the songs kick in, and then dancers and people, spectators just come in and drop down on the blanket what they can offer. And then dance, oftentimes, we'll dance alongside that individual during the, as a part of everything. And so the blanket dance is like, it mimics the structure of the novel itself. So what we have is we have Ever Geimausaddle, right? And he's on this kind of trajectory where he's not making good choices, you know, and he's like going, you know, becoming more and more aggressive to a certain degree, but just has a toxic personality, and the family sees it. And so everybody's kind of stepping in. So every chapter is narrated by a different family member. So we got grandma, grandpa, aunties, uncles. But as they step in, they're kind of offering like their own healing strength. Like, you know, hey, Ever, this is what I have to offer you. Remember, you know, like this is how, you know, you can kind of get yourself out of this mess. And not necessarily, you know, definitely picking him up, but not solving it for him. Like he needs to figure it out himself. So as it goes along, it kind of mimics the structure of that blanket dance, where we have all these family members surrounding this individual, offering him solutions that are traditional, cultural a lot of times, and just kind of showing him how to get through the process of decolonization, and you know, in a lot of the ways that, you know, a lot of natives kind of deal with.
Yeah, and that I won't give too much away, because you all need to buy this book and read it. But that particular scene, when I finally understood what that meant, it like blew my mind, and it brought everything together. And I just actually imagined the physical blanket, like a quilt wrapping Ever up, you know, the love of his family and the way they all come together for this one individual was just very powerful. So,
well, you know, it's interesting you say it like that. I've had multiple people give that exact same metaphoric description.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
I kind of visualized it in my head there. So before we go on with it, I have a bunch of great questions, but I definitely want to give our viewers an opportunity. If you have a question for Oscar regarding calling for a blanket dance, and you want to know anything more that I'm not asking, and you're curious about something, please put those into the Q&A at the end of our time together. I'll be reviewing those and calling up some of those questions. So definitely hold those questions, but put them in there. Let this be an interactive time together. So put those questions in the Q&A. So we talked about the book being multi-voiced. So you have all of these characters. You have aunties, uncles. You know, you have friends and you know, cousins and such. Talk to me. You know, because the novel is not your typical, you know, one narrator. Maybe a novel will have two narrators, but every single chapter is voiced by somebody else. Talk to me. Why did you make that choice as an author to tell us Ever's story through the lens of all these different people?
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to take on, that early on when I was at I remember reading the short story that had, and I can't remember the name of that story, but it had a peripheral narrator. So peripheral narrators were, you know, like I'll tell the story of Rubén, you know. So whenever one character tells the story of another character, and so I wanted to take that on, and so you know, using these different family members allowed me to take it on in just a very unique kind of way. And we just don't see a ton of peripheral narration out there right now. And so I wanted to try to, you know, capture that, take it on, and just do it in a really unique kind of way. And I also really enjoyed you know, like with literary fiction, one of the reasons why I fell in love with it was because of the rich symbolism. And, you know, whenever you're engaging with it, you know that there's certain themes and there's certain symbols in the novel, and they're kind of speaking to the larger thematic of the novel. So that what started happening is that it created this interesting dynamic where I was having to look at the depth of the novel through juxtaposition. So it wasn't just that, you know, it was peripheral narration, you know, taking that on, but also that in order to really get at what was going on in the novel, I had to look at how Lonnie compared to Leander. I had to look at how does Vincent Geimausaddle and Ever Geimausaddle, you know, if you juxtapose those two and cross compare the two of them, you know, how is Ever an extension of his grandfather? You know, how is Turtle and Lila, how are they similar or different than Lena Stock, their mother, you know, Ever's grandmother? So then it started to create all of this rich, like, oh man, you know, like Lonnie and Leander, they're struggling, and there's different, you know, like Ever sees that and tries to do what he can to help them. And so it like there's all of a sudden starts to create a rich kind of depth. And then you start to see these echoes start happening, like, oh, Ever Geimausaddle is like his mother because his mother did, you know, such and such with his dad. And so Ever Geimausaddle is interacting with Lonnie the same way his mother interacted with his dad. So it's all of a sudden this kind of continuation that keeps going until he can kind of figure out how to like navigate those spaces himself. But yeah, I just wanted to definitely capture that peripheral narration. It was a unique way to do it. It gives us the opportunity, like a very, you know, like a blatant kind of way of saying, you know, like I'm telling the audience, use juxtaposition. You know, like it's not just, you know, something you could use, like that, you know, that you might find something interesting, but you have to use juxtaposition to get the real depth out of it.
Yeah. And you do such a great job of the other thing I admired about it is that Ever he's at a crossroads in his life, you know, whether he's going to be, you know, do well in life, be successful and all that, but he's in this in between place in this multicultural experience of, you know, of being Mexican, you know, and having all of these different tribal and cultural influences in his life. But the one thing I think you did, well, I mean, many things you did very well, but one of the things that really stood out to me was your use of these cultural symbols that are throughout, and they're not just symbols. And that's kind of a weak word, but these things that are these objects that they have that are sacred to them and that they have meaning and they hold meaning. And I'm thinking particularly about like the salt and pepper shakers, the booger mask, right? The quilts, all the regalia. Can you talk about those objects' significance, how you arrived at those, and how were they used to tell the story of Ever?
Yeah, so that booger mask is pretty important. So in traditional Cherokee culture, and we call it a booger mask. So so back in the day, like in my grandmother's day, whenever you said booger, what you meant was like a boogeyman.
Yeah.
You know, like, so, you know, oh, you need to come in because it's getting dark, the booger's going to get you, you know, like that kind of thing. So a booger mask is like a mask that we would, you know, like a traditional mask that had like a kind of a scary kind of face. And so way back, you know, like, you know, pre-contact or at contact, as far as like colonization is concerned, and we had this ritual of a booger mask ritual where dancers would put on, you would have masks, and it would be kind of like in mocking, where we would, you know, Cherokees would come out and like pretend to like grab people and steal them, or pretend to attack the people in the crowd, and they would do silly things, you know, they would make people laugh. So it was almost like clowns. And so, but what it was designed to do was it was designed to use humor to kind of to bring down some of the fear, some of the anxiety, you know, like the fear of someone coming into the village and stealing you, you know, taking you away, or something tragic happening. But it used humor to bring down that anxiety. It used humor to deal with fear. And so inside of the novel, I used the mask the same way with Ever, like, because he has a pretty intense fear whenever he's young. And so his elder, his uncle, is a, you know, a traditional person, and he uses those masks to do that. And so you see that at, you know, at different spots in the novel, they pop up. So it's purposeful that it's not only shows up when Ever is young, but it pops up again when Leander, you know, because Leander is dealing with that too. He has a deep fear, and it comes out in aggression. Like he's, you know, he's afraid, but it comes out like, I'm going to be violent. And so that's purposeful that it's in that story, and then it comes up in Leander's story as well. So so it shows that kind of cultural continuation that's happening. But then also with the gourd rattles themselves, you know, like I really like those kind of metal gourd rattles. Like we have some that are just like a traditional gourd plant that you can make our rattles with them, but we also have the salt and pepper shakers that we use, those old school ones that are like, they're all metal. They used to give them out with like army rations way back in the early 1900s. But we use them to make our gourd rattles. And so and the reason we do that is that whenever we initially were put on reservations, it was illegal for us to practice our culture. And so we didn't have the items around us that we would traditionally use. And so what we did is we looked at things through our Kiowa eyes, and we made them traditional. And so what we did is we took those 10 salt and pepper shaker cans, and we turned them into rattles. And it was like a way of, it was an act of resistance. Like like we wanted to continue our culture and our practice, our traditional way of life. And we were able to do that by doing that. But I think that kind of shows that deep embedded sense of continuation. Like that comes from his grandfather, and his grandfather teaches his grandsons about how to resist and how to continue to be Kiowa despite facing all kinds of odds. But that shows up again, like that. Those shakers show up again and again in the novel.
Oh yeah, yeah. And you did the way you made this continuity, and I think it was the grandfather, where he's making the regalia for the boys.
Mm-hmm.
You have this intergenerational continuity through these objects that are going to carry through the generations. So definitely well done on that. And I hadn't even thought about Leander and the Booker mask and how you connect it, because there's definitely some correlations between Ever and Leander. You see some of the same characteristics and some of the same patterns developing, but you also see some victory going on in both of those characters.
Oh, yeah.
So very well done on that one.
Cool, thank you.
The other thing that was very interesting to me, so you have like this, I mean, and I'll just say like triculture, intersection going on with the characters. And what's fascinating to me, so I'm not as familiar with the intertribal differences between Kiowa and Cherokee, but talk to us a little bit about how you arrived at using those different, maybe the different words, because you do use them and you intersperse them, translingualism very well. But how did you arrive at those different voices for these characters? Did you listen to people? Like, where did you get that?
Yeah, so that was a hard one. That was back whenever I was trying to develop my voice. That whenever I grew up in Oklahoma, and then I moved out to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and where I was attending II. And when I first went out there, like one of the things people would always say is like, "Oh, I love your accent," and I would be like, "What accent? You're the one with the accent." So it took a long time. It took probably 2 years. I would say 2 years before I was like, "Oh, wait a minute, I do have an accent. I'm the one who sounds funny out here." And so once I could hear it, once I could hear my own accent, then all of a sudden, it just sparked something where I could all of a sudden analyze like the differences. Like I started to think, okay, well, there's differences between Kiowa and Cherokee as well. And so one of those things that helped me capture that was language. And so for me, I'm interested in intersections. I mean, you see it, like you mentioned, all over this novel. We got, Kiowa and Cherokee, but we also have his Mexican relatives as well. So we have, not just English, but we have Kiowa language in there, Cherokee language, and Spanish all mixed in there as well. So I'm super interested in how language it develops. I'm interested in slang. So not only do I use Kiowa, but I use Kiowa slang. Not only do I use Cherokee, but I use Cherokee slang. So I'm super interested in colloquial ways of speaking. I'm interested in the way English is transforming, or how we, with tribal languages and, in Spanish as well, just kind of change English to make it sound more like the way we might speak our own traditional languages. So just the transformation of language in itself, and how they influence each other, and almost like this autonomy that we have with language. Like we get to play with it in the community. We can say things the way we feel like we want to say them. And so I'm interested in those kind of intersections, but also intersections with cultures, intersections with people, like historically as well. Like how long have natives and Spanish people have been intermarrying for hundreds of years. And for me, growing up being half native, half Mexican, and growing up in a native world, just not having any representation in popular culture about what it is to be Mex-Indigenous. Like I didn't see it on television. This is back in the 80s, 70s, 80s. I didn't see it in books. Like I didn't see that kind of reflection of myself. I had to try to find it. And so, whenever I, was writing this novel, that was one of the things that inspired me, was that I wanted to offer that to another reader out there who's looking for a reflection of themselves. Someone out there who's like, oh, I'm indigenous and I have Spanish influences and I have American influences, and this is who I am, and reads the book and like, oh yeah, that's like me, and for me, whenever I was at II, when I first read Inscott and I first read the Way to Rainy Mountain, it's really Kiowa specific, and I was just validated. I read it and I was like, yeah, I know that story. I know these places. Like, he talked about Saddle Mountain. What's interesting is that Inscott Momaday's people and my people, my family, all come from that same community. Saddle Mountain is tiny. It is like super tiny community, and somehow these two Kiowa writers come out of that same community. But yeah, I saw reflections of what I grew up seeing, and it was really validating. And I think that was part of wanting to capture all of these different elements you were talking about, that kind of weave together, is in hopes to give someone else validation out there.
Yeah, love it. And you mentioned Mama Day, and so as I'm reading the book, right, I'm almost thinking all of these narrators, though they're talking about Everett, it's almost like they're having a conversation. They're sitting around a table, having a conversation about Ever, right? So there's this conversation going, and they're all looking at it. And I can't remember. I think it was the niece when she said "way." She's
Oh yeah.
said "way." I cheered for my people, my Mexican American gente. She called him "way," but she did it in such a way that there's love behind it, but there's like a love-hate thing going on. Anyway, so you have this conversation going on between the characters, but it seemed to me, and I probably haven't read as much Native literature as you have, but it seems to me that you're having a conversation with writers like Mama Day. Certainly came before you, is still around, right? But the work is still around, and all the this, we're in like this beautiful, almost not almost, but a renaissance of Native American literature. How do you feel your work fits into that fold and having that part of that conversation?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yeah, thank you for asking me that. I think that's one of the the things that I wanted to do, was kind of, as I came in, like, great writers coming in right now. Just this year alone, we got Morgan Talty, just had his book come out. Chelsea Hicks, she just had her book come out. But even before that, Tommy Orange, Therese Mayett. I mean, there's been an explosion of Native writers out there, and that was super important to me, to be able to find my own path. Like, what do I have to contribute here? And so I knew that I was a regionalist writer. I knew that I was tribally specific. Like, I was going to write from Tahlequah and Lawton, Oklahoma, and I knew that for me, my interest was in weaving these cultures together, and also, being that I am half Mexican, wanting to connect the indigenous landscape to represent all of Turtle Island, not just the United States and Canada, but Mexico as well. You know what I mean? And my father came from Aldama, Chihuahua, Mexico. And so for me, when I look south, I see indigenous people. And so I wanted to be able to bring that to the table as well, so that we can get a broader understanding of what indigeneity is, and a better understanding of the history of colonization as well, to include all of Turtle Island, so all of North America.
Beautiful. And I definitely, as a Chicano author, I made connections that I had not realized in my own work and in my own characters, that there's connections. And I'm thinking particularly of the Booger Mask. It made me think of Dia de los Muertos, that it's this humorous take on if we're afraid of something, like death per se, let's make light of it. Let's laugh about it a little bit. Let's deal with it in a way that imbues kind of some sense of humor, but also we can deal with things on a real level. So yeah, I connected to a lot of things that I did not think I would be connecting with. So I appreciate that. I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Rubén.
Let's see here. I think we might have some questions. I'm gonna check
Okay.
on Q&A here. See, I saw some questions coming in. Let me see here. Question about IAIA, your program. How do you and your peers support one another now that you're getting published or trying to get published? What would you say to Native youth considering IAIA but aren't sure that they want to go to a tribal college?
Okay. Well, one of the unique things about IAI is that, I mean, it has that intertribal atmosphere. And so you'll see students from just multiple tribes from across the United States, from Mexico. We whenever I was there, we had students who were indigenous from Mexico, and then also in Canada as well. So I think it's just a unique environment. It's a really nurturing environment. I is, and I'm pretty sure it's like this with a lot of Native colleges, but they try to recreate that kind of home life, what it's like back home, so that natives are comfortable there. But I think you just get a unique kind of perspective and an opportunity to reflect and see how how rich your own culture is. Because what happens is that as you see the richness of someone else's culture, like, wow, that is beautiful. Like I like the way that is. And so at a certain point, you'll start to go, well, wait a minute, I have that. Like back home, I guess, we do that. We do that too. And so you make those kind of parallels and those connections as well. So I think it gives you an opportunity for, I guess, a level of reflection that you just might not be aware that's out there. And so, and I did a minor in Indigenous liberal studies. And so, that made a big influence on my creative writing. So it gave me a broader perspective. And I think that's whenever I started to really see, South America and Mexico south of the border more of through an indigenous lens, because that's how we studied it. Like when you get indigenous liberal studies, you're looking at all of indigenous people everywhere, across the planet. You're not just really looking at specifically United States. So it just creates just a richer experience, I think. But when it goes to like supporting each other, I think it's it is super important to try to uplift instead of punch down on each other as far as natives go. And I think just being inclusive, like open up that door and step aside, let everybody in. You definitely don't want to open the door and then stand in the doorway and become a gatekeeper. So I just think that we should just stay away from trying to be gatekeepers.
Right on. Thank you for that. Another question: What are the most important themes you discovered while writing this book?
So I mean, the biggest theme, or the one that stands out to me the most, is probably dealing with like this kind of patriarchy against matriarchy kind of element that we're dealing with like largely in our society right now, and just kind of this transformation of manhood where we have to look at ourselves differently with a critical lens. Like I think that's what this book offers, is like this is what toxic masculinity looks like, because sometimes I think that we don't exactly understand that what we're doing is destructive, and sometimes we need a mirror. And then whenever we see it, we're like, oh, okay, that's terrible, and I need to not engage like that anymore. So I think that's one of the things that I wanted to capture with, as far as the narrative arc is concerned, is this ability to kind of look at some of the hyper masculine constructs, especially when we look at the necessity of having failure. You have to fail. You have to always feel like you're failing as a man in order to stay within the hyper masculine construct, because it doesn't matter how tough and how badass you think you are, there's always somebody else who's tougher and more badass than you. So, and that's just the mentality of that kind of hyper masculine construct. But just to put it on the table and say, this is what it looks like. Let's look in the mirror for a minute and then let's self-examine.
Yeah, and you definitely, I think you did a good job, because that's hard to write about, right?
It is, yeah.
It's hard because you always worry about like, am I crossing over into, am I glamorizing this? Am I sensationalizing this? But you do a
Uh-huh.
really good job of, and I think it has to do with how you show the others and how they see Ever and the behaviors he's showing. And then I thought what was really cool too is that when Ever's talking to Leander, you're
Hmm.
seeing like, hey, I know I got your number. I know
Hmm.
what you're going with right now. And so this is what's happening in your life right now. So I thought that was you did a really good job of that.
Yeah, and I think that it goes back to like working with at-risk youth. I worked with, when I was working at intermountain youth centers, I would work with some of the, most aggressive, like really aggressive males, and a lot of times, getting them to stay calm, I just had to be there. A lot of times I just had to stand next to them. Like
Mhm.
I could see them amping up, and I would just go stand over there. I wouldn't have to say too much. Just say, "What's up, man?" And he would, they would calm down. But I think that there is that component of having been on the other side of trying to be a role model for individuals who are they're feeling out of control. And so doing a lot of that work with youth, it shows through in the novel. And that's one of the reasons why I was super excited whenever Jimmy Santiago Baca signed on to read and give me a blurb. He gave me an amazing blurb, but he's done a lot of that work too. Like he works in prisons and he does all this work in the community to try to help individuals really process out some of that more aggressive behavior.
Yeah, and it's real clear you have firsthand experience with that. I'm a former principal,
Okay.
public school principal, and so I saw like, okay, this author knows what he's talking about, because the way the interactions are, the way you see Ever using his own experiences to be able to reach out to these youth, it was very powerful, and it was obvious that you had firsthand experience with that for sure. Other question, kind of shift gears here a little bit. You mentioned Olive Kittredge being an inspiration from Elizabeth Strout's book. Were there any other books or authors that inspired you or motivated calling for a blanket dance?
Yeah. So, I mean, Alice Munro is probably one of my biggest influences. Like you read um, Turtle Geimausaddle's chapter, and like I feel like that's a heavy Monroe influence there. But even with the Hayes Shades chapter, like that's what Monroe was who I had like fallen in love with right whenever I was deciding like, oh, I got to figure out my Cherokee voice. Then all of a sudden I had read she had a short story called Child's Play, and that was super like popular right at that same time. And I just obsessed on that story. This was the most perfect story I'd ever read. And so I read it over and over. I probably read it at least a dozen times that semester. And over the years, as I was developing my novel, I probably read it another 20 times on top of that. But yeah, just became super fascinated with Alice Munro, her voice, how she captures her characters, her rhythms, her pacing. And so she was a really big influence on me. And then like I mentioned before, in Scott Momaday, I mean, he's Kiowa, so I'm Kiowa, so I had resonated with a lot of his stories and his approaches. But like in Housemaid of Dawn, just being able to wrap an entire era around this one character, was pretty fascinating. Like it just felt like, man, that's a tough, it's tough to do, to be able to wrap an era of Native American life around a single character, but he does it. And so I became obsessed with him as well, and how he was able to capture that. And then also, I mean, a really big one, a lot of people are influenced by him, but Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I mean, he can pack, so much into like a small thing. And you had mentioned something earlier about like, well, every chapter is almost like a novel, and that's Marquez right there. Like, and some people have said that, like this, you read this novel, it's multi-generational, it's really in depth, but it captures probably the same kind of impact as a novel 4 times its size. It's like maybe 270, 275 as far as page content. But it packs a pretty big punch, and you get the full experience of a multi-generational saga.
Well done, for sure. So somebody asked an anonymous person here
Uh-oh.
asked a question, but it was a question for me because my work too is like I love different narrators and having
Okay.
voices. Who was your favorite narrator to write?
So for me,
Yeah. Who was yours?
okay,
When you
mine.
write a
Oh,
story, who was a favorite one you had the most fun with?
I think my heart was with Vincent Geimausaddle. I think that was where my heart was at. And I think that as far as like fun kind of, voices, I think there were two. One was Quentin Quintone that we just read,
Yeah.
but the other was Sissy, Ever's sister,
Oh, yeah.
Yolanda. She just has like a kind of a playful, biting, stinging, but where she's kind of playing with you a little bit, but it kind of bites, and she gets that from her grandmother to a certain degree. But it was fun to write her voice for sure.
Yeah, I definitely I sensed your just engaging with that sense of humor, the kind of a wry sense of humor, almost sarcastic a little bit.
Yeah.
Fun to read that one. Other question here. What does being a regionalist writer mean to you?
To me, it means writing about, I guess, a specific, for me, it's a tribally specific thing. So it would be like Oklahoma, Lawton, Tahlequah, a specific tribes would be regionalist to me. Like Oklahoma would be a specific distinctive region. And I think that what I love about regionalism is that especially in Native literature, but I think all literature really, it just really opens it up. It really it makes you think about like the specificity of your own family. Like my family is very unique. It's different from other families. And so how do I write in a way that is specific to my family? And even if, if 15 writers came out of Cherokee Nation and we all had that same regionalist mentality, we would have 15 completely different approaches to it. And just having, because, you look at it through that lens of like familial structures, like tribal type of structures, and it can start to become like you think of yourself in as an entire family unit. And so like all the stops in Tahlequah, that's my family. And so it's a big group where, the stop family, I'm a stop on my Cherokee side. And so we're a big group. And we, like we have those interconnections, and you start thinking of yourself like that. Oh, I'm a stop, or I'm a Hokeah, or I'm a Chavez. Like you start thinking of yourself in those kind of smaller local ways. And then you can start pulling out these very unique, distinctive ways of writing that creates a really diverse, for the community, of a diverse body of literature. So.
Great. So I think we'll wrap it up here. We have one more question. What's next on the horizon for Oscar Hokeah?
Well, I'm writing I've written another novel. I'm polishing it up right now. So kind of, in the polishing phase on that one. And then I also have a, first draft of the third book completed as well, but that's like, really rough. It's a really rough draft. So it's going to need a lot of work. But so I'm just working on, the upcoming novels over the next couple of years. Maybe, we'll see what kind of all pans out, how it all plays out. But yeah, definitely working on more novels in the similar kind of structure. And I stay within that kind of boundary that I had mentioned as being like Tahlequah, Lawton, Kiowa, Cherokee, intersections between Native and Mexican cultures. I think that's my unique path in the Native literary field, literary landscape. And I enjoy it. Like it's fun for me to do that.
Well, you've definitely what I think, and I you're definitely more of the expert on Native American literature, but I think I've read quite a bit, and I think your edition is a very unique voice, a very needed voice, and what I love about it is you come at it from this place of intersections, of all the different cultures coming together, how they influence one another, and how they just this interplay between cultures. So definitely well done.
Thank you, Rubén.
your contribution to this literary conversation we're having. So that's all the questions I had. I think Powell's is going to come back on. Definitely, I'll just put a plug in. Get this book. This is one of my top reads in the last couple of months, if not this year. Loved it. You'll plow right through it, and you'll want more for sure. So pre-order, not pre-order. It's already available for order. So pick up that book for sure.
Yeah, Ruben, I just want to tell you thank you. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us today, and grab Ruben's book as well. September 5th, 6th, did you say?
Yeah, September 6th.
September 6th. So get that pre-order in.
All right. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. It was truly a joy to host both Oscar and Ruben here and to welcome all of you. As they mentioned, please consider purchasing a copy of Calling for a Blanket Dance and pre-ordering Ruben's upcoming novel. I've linked both of those in the chat there to make it easy for you all. I've also added a link to our YouTube channel. We do record these events and it will be posted in the next couple of days. So if you want to rewatch or if you would like to share it with someone who wasn't able to attend tonight, you can find it there. We look forward to seeing all of you at another one of our events again soon. So until then, take care and thank you so much for being here tonight. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you, Oscar. It
Thank
was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.